U.S. military service is the strongest predictor of carrying out extremist violence. And again, this is not like this is, we've been knowing this. There have been signs, of course, that anti-government extremists are often former military. They are, right? And I wonder who taught them how to be so violent. Maybe we could move some of this money, just the police, defund the Pentagon, defund the US military. We don't need all that. It's not keeping us safer. Does this feel safe? We've got veterans who are falling on hard times because, of course, this country would never let a veteran slip. So this is Nick Terses in The Intercept. Both, again, he talks about both had U.S. military backgrounds. From 1990 to 2010, about 7 persons per year with U.S. military backgrounds committed extremist crimes. Since 2011, that number has jumped to almost 45%, 45 per year, according to the data from a new unreleased report shared with The Intercept by Michael Jensen. Michael Jensen's the shit, guys. He's the GOAT. I think he's former FBI, and Michael Jensen, especially following January 6th, I did a Newsbrook video about Michael Jensen. If you can get your hands on any interviews, in fact, maybe I can get him on the show. He is one of the only voices nationwide who is like, we have a clear problem between law enforcement, military, and anti-government extremism and acts of violence and terrorism, of homegrown terrorism, as we finally were able to utter. Remember when it was just ISIS? And then in the last, 4 or 5 years, and of course on Jan 6, everyone's like, yeah, homegrown terrorism. Say it with me. Homegrown terrorism. Say it with me. We're like, maybe all the wars we do abroad are coming home to roost. Maybe all the PTSD, maybe all of the hate and the violence and the unchecked sexual assault in the military and, the drinking and the drugs and the substance abuse, maybe all that's kind of coming home to our communities. In addition to the weaponry's here. All the companies that sold the U.S. military, all of their either lethal or non-lethal, but specifically non-lethal crowd control tactics, or even the fucking tanks. Where do you think they all went after the Iraq War was over? Where do you think they all went? They all came here. They came to the police departments. That's where they sold their weaponry. That's where they sold their non-lethal crowd control, weapons. Need I say more? We've talked about this, but Michael Jensen is great. Research director at the National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and Responses to Terrorism, or START, at the University of Maryland. Military service is also the single strongest individual predictor of becoming a mass casualty offender, far outpacing mental health issues, according to a separate study of extremist mass casualty violence by those researchers. From 1990 to 2023, 730 individuals with U.S. military backgrounds committed criminal acts that were motivated by their political, economic, social, or religious goals, according to data from the new START report. From 1990 to 2022, successful violent plots that included perpetrators with a connection to the U.S. military resulted in 314 deaths and 1,978 injuries, significant number of which came from, obviously, the 95 bombing of the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. In the latest attacks, the FBI identified 42-year-old Shamsud-Din Jabbar as a man who rammed the pickup truck into New Year's revelers on Bourbon Street. The U.S. Army said Jabbar served as a human resource specialist, information technology specialist. His service included deployment to Afghanistan from February 2009 to January 2010. Staff sergeant at the end of his service said Jabbar was inspired by the Islamic State organization, according to a short address by President Joe Biden on Wednesday night, who added that in videos posted to social media, he had indicated he had a desire to kill. The FBI said it did not believe he was solely responsible for the attack and said the investigation was live. What? What is this? He wasn't solely responsible. So even with him and his rented car, there was more. What might they mean? Do they know something they're not telling us? Is this another one of their well-laid plans to radicalize a random person, give them all the things they need, then try to entrap them before they kill? Probably not. I'm just asking questions. Because that's really, I mean, what Michael Jensen has blown the whistle on is the fact that the FBI really goes about rooting out extremism through the most ham-fisted, dangerous ways, which really is entrapping people, whether they be from right-wing militias to Islamic terrorists, sympathizers. Like, it's the same thing. They infiltrate, they do, what are they called? They're just entrapment scandals and schemes is exactly what they are. So every time they like foil a plot, it's supposed to it's effectively the same. They prove their own worth, right? By saying, "Hey, we foiled this plot about ISIS. Never you mind, we were the ones who radicalized this person and we got them to love ISIS, but we did foil the plot, so keep giving us money and we're doing a great job and there's terrorism still abound and you should still be very scared." And that was the same thing. And we had, God, I'm forgetting her name. We had a guest on, I believe a year ago or 2 years ago. We were talking about, I will find her name. I promise you, girl, girl, I promise you. We were talking about entrapment from the FBI does for right wingers, right? Because when I believe Christopher Wray of the FBI released this report that like homegrown terrorism is the biggest threat, more so than, Islamic fundamentalism or whatever, extremism. The FBI was like, "Oh, okay, cool. We'll just do the same tactics that we did for the Muslim community and we'll apply them to the anti-government extremists." And they were in part responsible for the attack or the plan, excuse me, to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer. If you guys remember that, right? Well, what we didn't remember is that two of the people involved in that were FBI informants. And there were also FBI informants in fucking Jan 6. Of course, the right is like, there were FBI informants. Jan 6 was an FBI plot. It's like, no, man. Jan 6 was not an FBI plot, okay? There were open Republicans saying we all need to go to Jan 6. The fact that there were a multiple FBI informants just shows you the kind of people who were at Jan 6, which people who they already had cases after them. They were already being marked by the FBI and they were turned informants because they were trapped basically by the FBI. They were like, "All right, we know you're participating in all kinds of things. You guys are violent. You have a history of violence," like Enrique Tarrio of the Proud Boys, right? And the right's using that as a way to say that Gen 6 was a FBI plus. Like, man, no. But the Gretchen Whitmer thing was in part an FBI sting operation. So that's something to note. If only we had a better FBI/no FBI, maybe these rumors wouldn't be so abound. And I know, we do need security. We do need some sort of, I'm not saying no FBI, but I'm saying like defund. I'm in the business. Defund, remake, replace. Better people all around. Authorities are also investigating whether terrorist attack in New Orleans is linked to the Cybertruck explosion in Vegas. So they go into okay. In the years 1990 to 2022, 170 individuals with U.S. military backgrounds plotted 144 individual mass casualty terrorist attacks in the United States, according to START research using the Profiles of Individual Radicalization in the United States, or PIRUS, not to be confused with PRIUS database. That is a database of all of those of us who want good mileage and to feel better about ourselves vis-a-vis the planet, okay? But also like a reliable Toyota, because they are good cars, all right? So the PIRUS, Profiles of Individual Radicalization in the United States, the PRIUS database, soft-ass libs like myself, okay? Shout out to all the PRIUS owners, which includes information on more than 3,000 subjects who committed extremist crimes in America. These troops and veterans represent approximately 1/4 of all individuals who plotted mass casualty extremist attacks in this span. A quarter, outstripping their representation in the U.S. population. Wouldn't you think? Okay, so we could probably find the stats, although the right isn't interested in stats. And if they were, they wouldn't care about this one because it probably wouldn't show them anything. But then how many, other than 9/11, but how many mass extremist crimes or mass extremist attacks have been plotted by foreigners, undocumented migrants, uh, people, asylum seekers? How many asylum seekers, more particularly, let's go with asylum seekers, because that's the most, obviously, the most loathsome, people who, don't want to be murdered in their home countries. Very dangerous. They're the murderers. They're running from themselves. It's insane how it works. How many asylum seekers do you think have been plotting mass casualty? I know usually when I want to seek safety in a new place, I usually, as a peace offering, bring a bomb. You know what I'm saying? It's just kind of how it works. I'd really like to stay here. That's why I'm gonna blow myself a home in the ground. I'm making no sense. You're making no sense. Um, Jensen and his colleagues found that while military personnel and veterans are not more likely to radicalize to the point of violence than members of the general public, when service members and veterans do become radicalized, they may be more likely to plan for or commit mass casualty crimes, thus having an outsized impact on public safety. Interesting. So when they do, it's big and bad. Researchers also determined that subjects in the PIRUS with US military backgrounds are 2.41 times more likely, so 2.5 times as likely to be classified as mass casualty offenders than individuals who did not serve in the armed forces. This means that the US military service is more reliable predictor for becoming a mass casualty offender than mental health issues, being a lone offender, or having pre-radicalization criminal history. Most mass casualty offenders with the U.S. military backgrounds and PIRUS were associated with far-right domestic extremist groups, so almost 75%. Approximately 15% or 24 offenders were inspired by or connected to foreign Islamist extremist organizations such as Al-Qaeda and its affiliates, 9 subjects, or Islamic State or ISIS, 13 subjects. So that's freaking important, y'all. Here is expert on clinical and forensic psychologist, expert on violence, excuse me. The Army is a vast organization with all kinds of different people and all kinds of different training and experiences, who cautioned against drawing any early conclusions about the relationship between the attacks and the attackers' military service records. He said data on the relationship between military service and mass casualty attacks should only be used for beneficial purposes, like smoothing the transition from military to civilian life. Okay, my guy, but like this is not, first of all, I would never say like that's why you got to lock them up. That's why you got to, no, that's why you have to make sure that mental health services are available. But I think more broadly, and this is sort of why we're like, you have to think about this institutionally. When we're about to confirm Pete Hegseth, let's put aside the drunkenness, let's put aside the rapiness, the fact that he's like, yeah, death to Islam, like we need to kill all Muslims. This is great. Like, you don't think we have a cultural problem? And the right is basically going to use this to be like, this is why we can't allow brown people into the military. It's all about DEI. Too many women, too many brown people. They can be turned too easily. We need solid, strong, white extremists. You know what I mean? Christian nationalist extremists. That's who we need. But like, it might have something to do with the amount of Islamophobia, the amount of hatred. I mean, shit, even just serving in Afghanistan and seeing the futility of your own of that war and how much you or Iraq and seeing how much you are creating more extremism, to the point where who knows, maybe some people do sympathize with ISIS. Maybe it's our foreign policy. Maybe it's the institution. Maybe it's the fact that in basic training, people cannot contact their loved ones or outsiders or family, almost like a cult. They get punished every time they receive a piece of mail. You guys know that if you've been through basic training or know someone who did, and that the chants that they sing are like, "What makes the grass grow? Blood, blood, blood." and they do target practice on Osama bin Laden's face. It could have something to do with all of that. What's going on, Frantifa? If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that button. And also, you can become a patron and support the show every single week. Get access to bonus episodes and exclusive merchandise. Patreon.com/Bitchuation Room. Do it.